Russia tomorrow.
Если трансляция начнется, то представим ее вашему вниманию.
We're joined by Victor Gao, professor at Suzhou University and vice president of the Center for China and Globalization. Good evening, Mr. Gao.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I wanted to ask you some questions. What's the overall outcome of this visit? Provisionally, at least.
Well, up to now, two things. One is to further promote China-Russian bilateral relations in all respects. And this makes these two big neighboring countries more friendly, more constructive in their relations towards each other. The second point, equally important, if not more important, is for China to explain why it came up with a peace proposal for ending the war in diplomacy between Russia and Ukraine. Now, the war has been going on for more than 1 year, and there are countries like the United States which keep sending more arms to Ukraine, pouring more fuel onto the fire of the war over there. China urges all parties to cease fire, to stop fighting, and to resolve whatever issues there are between them through peace and diplomacy. The Chinese proposal is the only proposal on the table right now, and I hope all countries, including Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the other hand, and the rest of the world need to pay close attention to China's peace proposal.
Mr. Gao, the last time we spoke, just a few weeks ago, we discussed this plan and had some, let's say, disagreements, because I personally don't see how it provides a way out of the situation that has transpired. I don't see what the motivation to agree to it is, as Ukraine can't accept its territories being occupied, and Russia is unlikely to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, as it is laid out in the plan that you talk about. I'd like to return to those 12 points in the plan, but I first wanted to ask you, what do you think Vladimir Putin is asking from Xi Jinping during the course of this visit? What are the Russian interests here?
President Putin already indicated that Russia has carefully studied the Chinese proposal, and they are happy to use this as the basis of negotiations if it happened between Russia and Ukraine. This is very important. Please keep in mind that Saudi Arabia and Iran used to be kind of irreconcilable enemies against each other. However, just recently, through Chinese mediation, Saudi Arabia and Iran decided to shake hands and reach a peace deal. This is unprecedented. This will change the dynamics in the situation in the Middle East between the Shias on the one hand and the Sunni on the other hand, and also involving almost all the countries in the Middle East and in the Muslim world. Now, if China can really promote peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, why don't we give China a chance to promote peace between Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the other hand? Now, to achieve ceasefire does not mean that there will be a settled border between Russia and Ukraine. Far from it. Peace between Russia and Ukraine will not be easy. It will be very difficult. However difficult it is, to move in the direction of peace will always be better than pouring more fuel onto the fire in the war of Ukraine, because you are talking about more and more civilians being killed and more places will be destroyed. And the war may escalate from conventional war to unconventional war, and it may spill over into other countries, including NATO member states. So we need to do whatever we can to make sure peace, no matter how difficult it is, will be starting through negotiation.
It is clear that the Ukrainian side should take part in these negotiations. I'm looking at a statement by Yuri Ushakov, Putin's presidential aide, who says that a telephone conversation between Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Volodymyr Zelensky is unlikely to take place either today or tomorrow. When do you think Xi Jinping is going to contact Kyiv, and what is he going to say to Zelensky?
First of all, China has good relations with Russia on the one hand and with Ukraine on the other hand. You may recall that before the war broke out, China was the biggest investor in Ukraine, and China suffered more losses in Ukraine other than only Ukraine itself. Now, between China and Ukraine, there are many channels of communication, including at the very top. And for China to really promote this peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, China does need to talk both to Russia on the one hand and to Ukraine on the other hand. Therefore, don't be surprised if eventually there will be an announcement that China is reaching out to Ukraine after reaching out to Russia, and including at the very top level. So let us build on this momentum. Let us really push in the direction of peace rather than only give war and continuation of war.
Я, к сожалению, не слышу ничего конкретного, как...
Unfortunately, I'm not hearing anything specific about how to put an end to the war. No one wants this war, especially Ukraine, which was invaded by Russia. But Xi Jinping says nothing about Russian aggression against Ukraine, nothing about Russian crimes against humanity that took place in Ukraine. What do you think might be a concrete suggestion that China puts forward for Kyiv? Considering, of course, that there will be no criticism of China's position from your end. But what concessions will Beijing demand from Kyiv? Nothing will happen without that, right?
Каких уступок? Ведь иначе не получится, правильно я понимаю?
Allow me to emphasize several points. First of all, of paramount importance is to achieve ceasefire. Now, for peace to be restored between Russia and Ukraine, there will be many, many things to do. And some of the things probably will be better handed down for the historians to do in the coming decades and sort them out. And legal experts need to be scrambling into action, for example, in all fronts. Now, of absolute importance right now is to achieve ceasefire. And then you may want to draw a line of actual control, which is not the final border. And then each side will have a chance to present its claims, which will be conflicting with the other side, and there will be overlapping claims, but sometimes time may be the best cure. And without resolving the territorial disputes right away overnight, maybe coming years or coming couple of decades will create more conditions so that eventually there will be a better solution. Now, this means there will be a time frame.
But what exactly are the concessions required of Ukraine?
No, I think China from the very beginning has emphasized that China respects the United Nations Charter. Ukraine is a member of the United Nations. Therefore, Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity need to be fully respected, period. That's China's bottom line. And if you view Ukraine as a member of the United Nations, then the UN Charter need to be applied to Ukraine. That simple. Therefore, let's give peace a chance. Let us create enough conditions so that the competent parties will really engage in peaceful discussion, eventually leading towards the final solution of their territorial disputes and many other disputes between them.
Скажите, пожалуйста,
Mr. Gao, do you think Vladimir Putin is currently willing to sit at the negotiating table and guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity according to internationally recognized borders? Yes or no?
When we deal with promoting peace, we need to give imagination every chance. We should not close down on any possibilities. Therefore, let us push our imagination as China did when we promoted peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Nothing should be pre-closed or foreclosed. Everything should be left open. And all imaginations and all efforts should be made so that eventually peace will be restored. That's the most important thing.
To follow up, about 30 minutes before the start of our broadcast, we saw the NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg warn China against sending lethal weapons to Russia. As we know, there are currently talks going on in Moscow, and Stoltenberg says, we have not seen any evidence that China is sending lethal weapons to Russia, but we have seen some indicators that suggest that Russia has requested this, and that this request is being considered by the Chinese authorities in Beijing. What are your thoughts on what Stoltenberg is saying here?
Allow me to mention several points. I actually knew Jens Stoltenberg when he was the Prime Minister of Norway. I met with him a couple of times in Oslo. At that time, he seemed to be a person of judgment, soundness, decency, and conscience. Now, more recently, Jens Stoltenberg has become really driven into insanity. He's not talking about common sense or judgment. He's becoming very much of an instrument of the United States, using NATO as a veil. Now, he's accusing China without any real evidence. He should have studied the law, and he should have studied evidence before qualifying to accuse China with such wanton and very unfounded accusations. Now, China stands for peace. China wants to do whatever it can to bring Russia and Ukraine together. China's action is very different from what NATO is doing, from what the United States is doing. They are pouring more fuel onto the fire in Ukraine, causing more losses of civilian lives in Ukraine, causing more destructions in Ukraine, causing the war in Ukraine to be on the verge of escalation from conventional war into unconventional war. Jens Stoltenberg should find another job rather than being plagued by the insanity of his position.
So you are completely sure that no weapons will be sent from China. I just want to put this point to bed. I wanted to ask you one final thing, Mr. Gale. This visit is incredibly official and grand with all the formalities. At the same time, in Moscow, Memorial, one of Russia's oldest human rights groups, is being raided. Criminal cases are being filed, people are being put in jail based on denunciations. Human rights in Russia are being completely violated. Why is Xi Jinping not responding to this at all?
If you talk about human rights or political dissent, then you have such problems everywhere in the world. The former President Trump of the United States is saying that he may be arrested today on Tuesday or tomorrow on Wednesday in the United States. What should you do? Condemn the United States? Accuse President Biden? Call for instability in Washington, for example? Sometimes pure domestic problems should be left with the country themselves, rather than for foreign countries to intervene in internal matters of other countries. China never intervenes in domestic affairs of other countries, and I hope everyone in the world can better serve his or her own purpose by avoiding intervening, interfering in the internal matters of other countries.
So you're really comparing the human rights situation in the Western world and in the Russian Federation, where there isn't a single political leader that isn't in jail.
In the United States, you have more serious violations of human rights. You are talking about extermination of the American Indians. You are talking about slavery of the American Africans. You are talking about the white supremacists, for example. You are talking about the deeply rooted racial discrimination against not only Afro-Americans, but Latinos, for example, Asian Americans, you name it. The United States is not an angel in terms of human rights protection. Don't fool ourselves when we talk about human rights. Human rights need to be protected everywhere in the world, including, in particular, in the United States.
So your position on this issue is quite clear. Thank you to Victor Gale, professor at Soochow University and vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, joining us live on TV Rain.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times. They got us on the 6th day of the war in Ukraine.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We left Russia, but we kept going. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia, the war, and Russian society in English as well.
Kherson is Putin's 3rd major defeat in a row.
What is wrong with the Russian army?
Stories no one else can tell you. Hear it right from the source. Subscribe to our channel.